And if that UID reaches consensus and has trust, then that's the amount that is burned. That's one thing that's interesting and I think important. We didn't want it to be just something that could be set by the owners, because our philosophy is that these subnets are sort of co-run our ecosystem at large. Subnet owners are, main men. They're the main characters in the subnets, but in the end, you can't just do anything you want. You have to reach consensus amongst the stakeholders in the ecosystem. The second important implementation detail is that we do this through the weights. So the amount of mining emission that is being burned is something that can be continuously adapted instead of being a manual process. People in the past had suggested that it be just something that is tuned by the owner with a pseudo call. We think that's far too manual and doesn't really align with the philosophy of bittensor, where we think markets should be fluid and elastic. Doing it through the validators is important because we hope that the way that this feature is implemented is that the validators can monitor in real time the ratio between, say, organics and synthetics, and try to match the miner emission based on the ratio of those two things. So as an example, say 51, or perhaps we'll have Zoro explain how he can do it on his subnet on 27. If there's more rented machines, we can increase the miner emission adaptively, slowly over time. If there's no rented machines, we can decrease it over time, and the miners can pull off resources and decrease cell pressure. We think that this could make subnets very efficient economic machines. And we hope that the subnet owners and the validators, they implement this design, do it in a way to maximize the effectiveness of these tokens as value generating machines. Okay, that said, there's a reason why I have personally pushed back on burning miner emissions, and I still believe personally that it's best to distribute the token inflation as much as you can into your miner community, rather than viewing miner emissions as a pure sink in terms of capital loss. I think that distributing out this token to the most cracked engineers that are solving your problem and getting them aligned is really a massive feature for the subnet. And I recommend that subnet owners think of it this way: aligning your subnet miners into your, effectively, a corporation or a company, people that are value aligned. And speaking from experience, this has been one of the best things that we've ever done with bittensor over the first 4 years of its lifetime. Many of the miners that were allocated large proportions of our stake of tau in the first 2-3 years of bittensor, came out to be incredible engineers and product builders, subnet builders, researchers, etc., that allocated their time and resources back into the subnets, the token that they were mining, which was tau. Caro is a good example of this. Mog is a good example of this, and most people don't know Taco, but Taco was an early miner that went on to write YC2, something that perhaps OTF would never have been capable of doing in the first place. But we attracted that level of quality, those individuals, through our liberal distribution of mining emissions to our community. So that's why personally I wouldn't really use the UID, but to each their own. We think that we have our opinions about the way in which token economic systems should be run, and we've made some of those sacred and unchangeable. For instance, like no pre-mine. But we also think that owners should be allowed to adapt, and clearly people are already beginning to adapt the way in which the token distribution occurs. We have no plans right now to allow changes in the distribution or the between validators, miners, and owners. The 184141 stays. Simply, this gives the network the ability to lock or specifically burn portions of the emission that goes to miners if the validators can measure in real time that those resources are not being used properly. It would be very cool if what we see coming out of this is subnets that implement their benchmarks directly into the validators and increase or decrease the burns based on the performance on those benchmarks. More synthetics, more organics. We're getting too many inferences. We need to increase emission. We're not getting enough. We need to decrease emission. We need to burn this amount. The subnet is not capable of decreasing the loss on this machine learning model, or currently there's an exploit going on, and if that exploit can be measured by the validators in real time, they can use an opportunity to decrease the miner emission every tempo. Yeah, so that's my little spiel on that change. There's also another change coming out next week with regards to transaction fees. We have a static transaction fee on operations currently staked and unstaked. It's very cheap. We did this on purpose so that it would be easy for people with not that much tau to interact with the system. We're changing that to a dynamic design for two reasons. This dynamic design looks at it looks at the amount of dividend that the amount that is being staked would get in one tempo. So for a very small amount of stake, this can actually mean that the transaction fee is slightly less. But importantly, if people have been looking at these charts, there's all these like jumps that are occurring. People are effectively moving their stake around to try to capture the epoch emission. It's a dangerous strategy, but some people are applying it and bloating the chain. So this makes it so that the fee is based on the expected amount of dividend that would be accrued in that tempo. So making this strategy ineffective. So that's something that's important coming out next week. I want to talk a little bit about Holocaust and 73 and our perspective on the way in which OTF reacted to those subnets. First of all, I would say that it's important to recognize that subnets on bittensor are co-owned by the owners, the miners, the validators, and the tau holders at large. There is a decentralized control structure by design inside those subnets. Subnet owners can write code, but that code doesn't need to be run by validators, especially if they perceive that the code is not beneficial to tau at large, or maybe even the subnet at large. That's by design and important. That it's not just an autocratic rule on behalf of the subnet owners who have a very powerful position, and you could think of it as like a game theoretic centrality in determining what that mechanism runs. But ultimately, it's the validators who run the code. And for this reason, it is designed so that the validators can actually choose whether or not the code they're running is the code that they want to run. Sometimes they don't run that code, they just wait copy. But that's fine too. It's actually just a showcase of the fact that validators do have the ability to do what they want inside of a subnet. So for the lol subnet, the way that we our opinion was that this was not beneficial to the ethos of bittensor, and we found other validators who agreed with us. We child keyed to OTF, and we ran effectively the inverse incentive mechanism. Instead of incentivizing miners to hold the tokens, we incentivize them to sell, which is ironically kind of a meme as well. People have argued that we shouldn't do that, but I think that it's a misunderstanding of the way in which token ownership works in bittensor. Right now, root has a good proportion of ownership in each subnet on purpose. We built it this way so that we could stop just general attacks on the ecosystem, and that we could align the network towards goals that we all share. And that is the privilege that we have via the stakers in OTF. So that can also change, and it's also liquid. If people want to unstake from OTF because they didn't believe that we made the right decision by changing the subnet code, they are welcome to unstake, and we would hope that people would use that liquid democracy to do the same. A bit about 73. This one's slightly more difficult, and it was a decision that we made internally by noting that what the subnet owner on 73 had done was manipulate some of the pseudo call parameters that we had not considered as likely attack vectors, but were specifically the ability to make it to stop validators from setting weights. Our perspective is that setting weights in subnets should not be manipulated in order to censor individuals and censor stake operations. The goal of this developer was to make it so that no validators could actually validate on the subnet, and they were successful in the first 4 or 5 days of the subnet by manipulating the weight set rate limit, which means that you could only set weights every 60,000 blocks, which was about 9 days, as well as the staleness on weights they set down to 120 blocks. So every tempo they would decrease the weights rate limit down to 0, set weights themselves, and then right before the epoch, use those weights to generate 100% of the dividends and 100% of the incentive back to their own keys, and stop other validators from doing anything in the network. We intervened as OTF by capturing the pseudo calls ourselves. So there's 2 keys that are capable of setting pseudo on a subnet. It's the OTF's global pseudo key as well as the subnet owner pseudo key. So we were able to break through, set weights ourselves, and then take over the UMA consensus of the subnet and push the funds to our own key, which we intended to simply burn. The subnet owner did not like that because he perceived that as an overstep by OTF, but I think it's, again, a misunderstanding of the way in which the co-ownership of bittensor works. It was a particularly dangerous attack for a number of reasons. One of them was that because he was able to distribute all of the dividends to his own key, there was effectively no root cell pressure, which was unfair against other subnets because he was getting 100% of the root dividends. The day before, his key was getting the highest APR in the system, so he had to act quickly before he attracted too much stake, and it was effectively impossible for us to do this thing. Anyway, this has been fully patched, and as I understand it, I think the developer is selling his slot. This also stimulated a conversation in the ecosystem about 18% for subnet owners, whether or not this is too low. I personally believe that it isn't, and we set this because we felt that it was a fair number. 18% over time is more than OTF, the founders at bittensor, ever attained, and it's actually a substantial amount of token if you think long term in your subnet. 18% comes out to about 25% of the final supply of the 21 million. About 4 or 5 million tokens out of the 21 million, which is significant if the subnet owner is capable of waiting a sufficiently long time. OTF got around the fact that we did not have tokens to sell by writing contracts with accredited investors to the ability to sell future tokens that we did not have access to OTC. I think that this is a reasonable strategy for teams that are looking to bootstrap liquidity into their teams to pay for branding and hiring developers. There's something like 2.5 million tokens that a subnet owner will have after the first 2 years. If there is also some liquidity that's injected into the pool, but if this is being pulled out, it also increases the price, so it's a fair weather problem, and you will have actually more liquidity at your disposal because of a higher price. So in the steady state, it is actually a substantial proportion of the networks you own. And I would urge builders to see the distribution into the validator set, the people that are staking, as well as the miners, as extensions of the companies they're building, and fold in the miner community into each of your subnets, which is something we did, and it was a very successful strategy. And I think that teams that do this will be highly rewarded by having aligned individuals who help them write code. Anyways, that's enough of my spiel there. I don't want to take any more time away from the two builders that are going to be speaking on stage today. So that's Zorro and Yuba. Why don't you guys raise your hands and we'll pull you up on stage. Welcome. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
So, why don't we start with neural internet? Zorro, bit of an interesting story how you guys got into bittensor. Why don't we start there?
Of course. Yeah, do you mind if I just I bring up some of the superstars in our internet?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Don, do you mind just you could just raise your hand. There we go. Let's see, Ivan as well, and also Mohammed and Douglas. There we go. Yeah, let's kick things off. Don, feel free to introduce everybody, and then we can just start.
Okay, yeah, so we've got Ansel Zorro here. He is the, you might say, president of product. We also have one of our lead developers, Ivan, and Mohammed. And Douglas is here as well. Douglas is kind of an old-time, a lot of experience with bittensor, and is a consultant for with us. I'll have Ivan and Mohammed speak a little bit about proof of GPU, because those guys are deeply involved with some of the technical aspects of that. But I could go ahead and explain some things about neural net real quick. Yeah, so we're a DAO built on bittensor. We've been self-funded from the beginning through emissions of tau.
Hey, Don, your screen is not loading for me and for a couple people in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, for anybody that can see it, please post screenshots in the chat.
Let me try again with entire screen. See what. Your stream is still running. We paused your preview to save resources. It says. Can you not see my screen?
Unfortunately, we can't see it, Don. One thing that you can do very easily is simply take a screenshot of your slide if you're showing slides, Don, and just put them in the channel. That will show up in the recording, and also people can just see the images.
Can you see it now? Because it seems I can see it now.
I cannot.
Yeah, me either.
Okay, that's too bad, because I have a big chart where I need to slide around to be able to explain things. Can I leave the meeting really quick and just come back and see if that helps? And if not, then we'll just continue the way it is.
Yeah, as well, and also maybe Zorro, you could try to screen share as well. Maybe just be this guy. Or a link is sometimes valuable. People can just share, look at it in real time.
Yeah, that would work.
All right, Don should be back now. Hey, Don, let's try one more time. If not, let's just share a link or images.
Absolutely. Okay, give me 1 second. No, yeah, it says it doesn't want to share it, I guess. So. Okay, let me take a screenshot of each one of these, and we'll kind of go over the basis of it. So,
Also, Don, you can post a link just so then people can see it in real time as well, and they could slide around as we kind of discuss things.
yeah, give me 1 second to change the permissions on the link. So it's just view. Button link. And if I can use this for reference, that would be helpful. So let's see, where do we get chat in this? Chat. When you guys can see that, then I'll go ahead and continue. Are we good?
It's required to log in.
Boy, okay. Yeah, I see a couple people, but I guess anybody who doesn't have a Lucidcharts account might not be able to see it. So I will make an export of it, and I will put the SVG in chat. So let me get this real quick. Let's do that. Okay, so while I'm waiting for that to export, let's just get started with what we are, who we are. We are a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, and as such, we are able to use our token as stake for governance, as for economic purposes like transfer of value. Stop. Oops. Yeah. Sorry for the late start here, guys. We'll get moving in just a second. Okay, so you guys have the SVG there if you want to take a look at that. I'm not sure if it is going to have a white background, so you might have to find a way to get a white background in it. Okay, so we are a DAO, and the DAO is initially based off of stake in tau. We are going to restructure, and so that our governance is based on stake on our alpha token. And with that, then you'll have voting rights similar to how you do in Open Tensor Foundation to vote on proposals, etc. That's part of our economic plan. We'll show why that's a good business model for us here pretty quickly. To continue on though, I just want to get into what our target market is. Right now, that is OS level model training. So if you need to log in and do train your models on a specific OS, you can do that. We're not distributed training where you can have multiple machines training the same model. We will be there in 2026. That's our goal for now. And there's several technical factors that are going to play into how we're doing that. So essentially right now, you are able to rent out a Docker container, same way you would possibly as run pod or a lot of these other competitors. I think there's probably about 30 out there that I know of. And you can take, bring your own data, bring your own model, and you'll be able to train it there on, say a machine with 8 H200s. That's going to cost you, I don't know, $250,000 if you're going to go out and buy the machine. So with us, you can get that right now for, I think we actually discussed today, I think I saw something about $12 an hour. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but I did see something in our chat about that today. Okay, so with our business model then is direct access to compute. And with that, we are kind of a middleman. We're not really into investing in models themselves or cleaning and prepping data, but we are just here to provide you the access to be able to do that. in the future, we will be moving away from just only OS level model training into using things like Run AI, where we're able to run Kubernetes clusters, and you'll be able to scale up to however many machines you have, and we'll be able to provide that as a service where you just bring your own model, bring your own data, but we can then provide the training for you across a wide range of machines inside of a cluster. Technology-wise, we have just been going through a big rebrand this year, and that's part of our goal of showing who we really are. Trying to improve the face, because we want cash flow is our most important factor in all of this. And if you think about crypto in general, that's where a lot of the naysayers are still at. Well, there's no cash flow in crypto. Bittensor, of course, as a lot of people understand, there's plenty of opportunity for cash flow, and to do that and to attract more business, that we're heading down the road right now of refacing things while we improve on reliability, which is another factor that a lot of distributed trustless compute environments are facing, which is reliability can be really difficult. Okay, so NodeXO is going to be our new website. Right now, it's still at our knowourinternet.ai website. We're going to rebrand to NodeXO. We do have some logos and are working on landing pages for that. 2.0 website will be done this year. We are in the process of doing that. Our team size does fluctuate with the price of tau, so it depends on how fast we're getting things done. Depends on how well our network is performing as well. So I can't give you an exact date on that, but it is well underway, and I have seen some of the pages, and they are quite attractive. I'm really happy with the way things are going. It's going to be really a clean, classy feel. I think we're also, NodeXO is going to be targeted towards the corporate market. So a lot of blockchain in general goes towards the dark themes. We're going to have a dark and light theme, but I think we'll default to light so that we can attract more people in a space outside of the traditional blockchain markets. Okay, so let's get into some of our roadmap here. According to things that I think that are really affecting the entire network, or not the entire network, but the entire industry, I should say. In trustless compute, or incentive mechanism, trustless compute validation, this is a difficult one. It doesn't matter if it's just GPUs or it's storage or a lot of other RAM even. There's a lot of room for misuse, and so we have been spending a lot of time on things like proof of GPU. Our current proof of GPU service, I believe, is one of the strongest points of Subnet 27 and how we're doing that with Merkle tree proof validation. And through that, we're passing over a seed from the validators to the miners, and then from there, they will run the model. We are able to look at those calculations because we've done analytics on what they should look like coming from specific models, and then are able to calculate what type of model they have. That's where we're at right now. This needs to become more sophisticated, and we have actually started to collaborate with other players in the market outside of anything to do with bittensor, who have written white papers and are leaders in this area, because we've come to the same conclusions with where we want to go with it. And so we're actually talking right now about even starting an open source Python library to build this, to provide it for the world, actually, not just us.
Can you talk more about this? Can you talk more about this, Don? So how does the validation system work on the subnet right now?
Okay, so for GPUs,
yes.
So like I said, we pass over a seed of the model for the Merkle tree. We don't pass over everything, because that way we don't overload our validators with creating these giant Merkle trees to pass over. At that point, the miner can build out the Merkle tree and then run the model on its machine at full capacity. When it runs it at full capacity, it should be able to pass with a certain benchmark, and that benchmark, or that specific score or range of score will show us which model it is. I still think that's not sophisticated.
You mean GPU? It'll tell you which kind of GPU they're running.
Yes, based on their score, we've done analytics on what the score should look like coming from specific models.
And so
it's falling within that category.
You pass over the specs for a machine learning model to train on a data set, and ask the miner to actually train that model and return the model and then eval the model. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think I know Douglas probably knows the most about this. I don't know if he's in the meeting right now, but with the Merkle tree, like you have to build it out and it's essentially arrays inside of arrays, right? So by the time you use up your entire GPU trying to calculate what the end result is, it's mainly the score that we're building that off of. But let someone else that's actually built it explain the rest of that. Let's see, who do we have here that can do that?
Yeah, Douglas is here.
Douglas, okay, yeah, Douglas thinks a good guy for it.
Yeah, I can do it, or Mohammed if you want to talk about it. Basically, we're just the seed is sent over by the validator, so we don't.
Has he raised his hand? Is he coming up on stage to discuss that?
Oh,
Am
he's
I-
in here now.
Am I?
Can you hear him, Cons?
No, I can't hear anybody except you and Don.
Hey, Douglas. Cons can't hear you. Yeah, I can hear you too, but I don't.
I can hear comments.
Yeah,
Okay.
the chat's saying they could hear him as well.
John's muted me.
Okay.
What about
I
Mohammed?
can't even see Douglas on the stage, actually.
That's weird.
As Douglas, why don't you leave and join again? Can you do that, please?
There we go.
Oh, perhaps. No, I know why. I've just muted you. I have you now.
Yeah.
There you go. Go ahead, Douglas.
Okay, yeah, so basically we'll send a random seed over to the miner to generate the Merkle tree, and then it's basically a challenge response workflow where the miner starts to basically compute, and then once it's done, they can send it back to the validator, and basically all it's trying to do is test for T-flops right now, and if we have a range of tolerance, and if they fall in that range, we can see this person has an H200 or this person has an H100 depending on their T-flops. And the reason we're doing it in this way is because it would be a burden on chain. It just wouldn't work. Validators doing full recomputation. So this is a way to kind of get around, using the Merkle proof is a way to get around full total recomputation, because the overhead for that is just too high. But we're still able to verify that they did actually compute the answer, and we can verify based on T-flops that they should be at an H200 or they have an A100 based on those numbers that we have.
And what exactly is a Merkle proof? Can you explain that? So it's a Merkle proof of what? So I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, so we send them a seed, which is completely random, and that's where they'll do the computations on. And basically using the Merkle proof, we don't have to fully recomputate, do the recomputation of these matrices that the miner's doing. So does that make any sense?
It's a tree of hashes. So you've got arrays of arrays, and they've got hashes inside of them, and you have to calculate all of it. And it's exponentially bigger at every level you go. And with that, you can really use up the full bandwidth of your GPU, and then calculate teraflops by how quickly it's able to do it.
Interesting. Okay, so this allows you to, yeah, right. So the speed at which they can solve this tells you what type of GPU they have available, and that they also, I imagine, need to have a certain amount of memory available on the machine to do it within a certain amount of time.
Exactly. We had someone show up with a 4090 a couple weeks ago, and they're like, "Oh, we were running another workload on it." And of course, it's gonna, your H200 is gonna look like a different machine if you're doing anything else on your machine at the same time. And this actually goes into how we're going to be addressing misuse, because we're going to start doing raids on groups of machines at the same time, so that if you're trying to spoof, you won't be able to, because you're not going to be able to pass two proof of GPU tests at the same time due to the way the scores come out. So if you're doing anything extra, it might not look like an H200. If you have an H200 and you're doing something else with it at the same time, it won't.
And when you're using these machines through this front end, like, how does that work you're given a key, you SSH into the machine, you use the machine. What stops miners from just flipping out the machine or changing the machine when you enter into the SSH?
Let Mohammed talk about that. We have been addressing it. So changing out hardware, and I know in the past month actually we had a couple tickets for that. I'm sure maybe Mohammed knows the end result, but ultimately we do pass over proof of GPU as often. So they shouldn't be able to swap out when they're not rented. During the tickets that we recently had for were detecting hardware swaps while they're rented. And that's something I don't have a perfect answer on at this moment. Maybe Mohammed or Ivan knows.
It's a hard problem. Because if the person is using the machine, you can't run the proof because you just have to kick them out of the machine in the first place. But it's still very. It's interesting that you have a foolproof method of determining what kind of computer they have behind the miner. So, what are you guys seeing right now for in terms of like the ratio between rented compute versus the amount that's on the network?
There's a real reliability issue right now. So that's the thing that we're going to be addressing in 2025. And there's multiple things we can do that. And I know it's not just us. It's outside of bittensor, it's happening as well. You look at Clore. Clore AI, if you go to their market rental, every single machine says spot on it. It's because they're also a blockchain based network or service. And they recognize that they don't have any control over who's going to leave when. And that's one of the issues. We've also probably been dealing with some reliability issues, whether that's dealing with misuse, so people that are trying to misuse the network and just gain dtao or alpha token and then not participate on top of that. So they just script it so they're dropping your rental. They kill your Docker container after 20 minutes or something, because they're not receiving any incentive to keep it running. And I can talk to you about what we're going to do to address some of those things. But right now, our rental rates are quite low because I don't feel like we have a really great reliability on the network. It has been as high as, I would say, like 15 to 20 when I go in and look. In the last couple of days, because of the things we've been dealing with, it's a lot lower than that. I know in September when we first started, a lot of people were testing it out, and there was also incentive to be rented. And at that point, there was only 1 or 2 machines you could get. That's changed though as we've moved away from 4090s, etc.
You guys are incentivizing H200s, H100s, just those types of machines, or like, and how is that determined in the validator?
Based on the T-flop scores essentially, and this is where we can be able to like shift incentives based on demand. Like if the demand is saying, hey, look, we only want to pay for B200s because obviously that's the best machine for AI workloads, whether it's fine tuning, pre-training, or even just inference, then we can be able to essentially tweak the scores and only align the incentive to incentivize miners to plug in, for example, B200s, and that's why we've essentially cut out some of the older models, because at that point then we'll be wasting incentives, because in theory the demand isn't there, for example, for a 4090 compared to something like a B200. And that's how we kind of differentiate, is based on the scores that the validators receive back from benchmarking the miners.
What is your plan for the interaction between the people that are renting and the capital flow from those rental purchases and the subnet token on 27?
So you're essentially saying, well, yeah, sorry, Don, we kind of have like this delay.
How do you move what's your intention for the revenue generated from the subnet?
Okay, perfect question. Okay, this is something that we've been thinking about quite a bit, right? We've been thinking between recycling the revenue or burning the revenue. It honestly depends on the market dynamics and where the environment is, right? Because we don't want to just take all the revenue and just recycle it and then continuously extend like halving events and then continuously like put these tokens back into circulation in the future, right? We also need to think about like how we can reduce this potential dilution by just like burning set tokens when revenue is produced at specific intervals. Like in a bull market when there's like the token is performing very well and there's a lot of demand for the GPUs, right? Then we could think of starting to like use that revenue to then recycle, like pretty much saving for a rainy day, right? And then when it's a bear market, then it's like it makes more sense to take the revenue and essentially burn it, so then we can reduce total supply and it could potentially reduce the time to essentially have that happening. But yeah, this is a question that's like we're constantly like going back and forth about, and like I really think that this is something that needs to be solved by the community. Like you make a great point that these subnets are like co-owned now, right? It's not just on us to decide, what to do with the revenue. I feel like it should be decided on by the entire community as a whole, right? So then we can stay aligned.
What is the interaction between subnet 27, the stake value there, and this DAO that you were speaking about, Don? And like, how is that working right now? Where is this DAO being formed? Is it on the bittensor blockchain? What's the structure of it? What control does it have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So like we're seeing how you guys like structured like the DAO for bittensor in theory, where it's like bittensor posts these proposals, and then the validators they vote on it, and then the stakers vote with their stake based on like whichever validators essentially aligning with what they're voting for. And that's essentially the same idea that we have. Where like the thing that we want to like we want the community to vote on is essentially the list of GPUs that we will support, the amount of incentive that will go to each individual GPU model depending on demand. Also, like even just tweaking specific hyperparameters, like being able to stay in consensus with like the community and what they're looking for, like that's key. And like the model that you guys implemented is makes the most sense, and it's like pretty straightforward to implement at the subnet level as well. So that's the direction we're going towards.
And with the DAO too, like the token does not give you rights to say assets or of the company. What it does do is allows you to to vote on how maybe assets, or not assets but profits are distributed. So if everyone decides that they want 100% of profits after taxes and expenses for things like services when we have other providers we need to pay out, because we're not just, I believe that Subnet 27 is going to be our biggest offering, but we're still going to offer, secure compute access through providers like Oracle. And Oracle is going to need to be paid for that access. But 100% of those profits after tax could then go back to buyback of the token to increase the value of the overall of each holder's stake in neural internet. That's one example, right? But in the future, it could change, as he's saying, based on, as Hans was saying, based on what all stakeholders want and we vote on.
Paying attention to the time here, we also have Yubo to come on the stage and speak. You mentioned that decentralized training is actually on the roadmap for 27. How does that fold in here?
So we need to move to Kubernetes for that to happen. And also we need to be able to break out from the UID limitations of 256. We have done some really cool experimentation with trying to use some child hotkeys in an off-label manner, right? They're intended for validators. And we did have some luck on even incentivizing miners on the network with child hotkeys and keeping them as you could say a cluster. But there's some limitations with that in the metagraph and just being able to properly store enough machines. The issue with that is we wouldn't be able to put enough machines on each UID still, because we do plan on possibly serving data centers someday on subnet 27, and you could possibly have thousands of machines. And so to do that, then we need to use Kubernetes, and we will store that. We will store secondary UIDs in a publicly accessible database that is shared between all validators, and the validators will have an API to keep the database secure, to be able to store that information. And then from there, in 2025, it's going to be kind of an over-engineered miner in the beginning. This year, we will have K3s and Kubernetes running a control plane a miner probably by a VM using KubeVirt instead of using Docker containers, and that's for security purposes. But it'll also allow us to run a secondary Kubernetes layer. So, like, let's say on one machine, if you guys look in the document on the very far right side, there's some physical machine layouts there, and essentially, our miner will have Kubernetes, the control plane. It'll have also a hotkey controller service that'll be built in a Docker container, and that is for managing all of the, the wallets and anything that goes with that. Now you can have multiple machines, and our validator will actually know which ones have a control plane on them. And so if one goes down, it will keep checking the API endpoints of Kubernetes, similarly to how a load balancer does now. But instead of a load balancer, we can't always guarantee there's going to be a load balancer doing that for us. So we will also have our validator checking machines it knows that has a control plane, so that if one of your machines goes down, the rest in your cluster can still communicate with our validators without losing your entire cluster over just having one machine in the middle. So scalability wise though, to get there, we need to use Kubernetes to be able to then first just have one machine with Kubernetes running. If your miner goes down or your hotkey controller goes down and the machine doesn't go down, it can restart those services. That's going to help with reliability on that scale. And when we scale up, because we're using VMs, we have Kubernetes on one level, which is the cluster that is run by the miner and who's over the owner of the UID. But then on top of that, once they spin up those VMs for us, we can then run our own clusters and our own control planes that are separate from them, and we will allocate their specific VMs for our nodes to be able to run Kubernetes. Now we can not just choose, like, say, one UID or one service provider, but we can start running the workloads across our entire subnet 27. Even one workload, we could use up the entire network just to run that one if someone wants to pay us to do that. So it's kind of been almost a nested thing. You have Kubernetes and we're using it, but then since we have the VMs there as well, we'll be able to then allocate them separately to be able to get there. It's a lot easier to understand with diagrams, I think.
Beautiful. Don, Zoro, I interrupted you asking about the mechanism, but any closing remarks or final thoughts you want to put out?
Yeah, I mean, I really do appreciate the community support. I mean, we've been here, I don't know, this has been 4 years. Cons has been quite a journey. I remember even just first thinking about the idea of like decentralized distributed compute within bittensor using subnet architecture. Quite amazing to see how far we've gone, and even just the industry overall, like everybody's kind of going towards trusted compute. At the moment, only trust minimized compute is possible, but things will change as time progresses. And yeah, we're working towards making sure that we can be one of the first to implement such a system where like compute is fully trusted in an environment where nobody's trusted. Like that is very, very exciting.
I do have one more thing to say here too. We have also a compute API, which is going to give access to any third-party provider. So we're going to be a good middleman here. We're not just going to have a website where you can log in and pay for services, but you'll be able to programmatically, anyone across the world can then use us to either scale up what they need to, or use cheap compute with workloads that are destined for wherever they can get the service the cheapest. With that, we already have the API built, but we do need to get our reliability built up a bit more. And I do believe at some point here in 2025, we will be offering that, and even partnering. We're talking. Akash is one of the other organizations that we're going to have a partnership with, and there'll be some interoperability between us and them through the API. But it's not just going to be them. That's just the first one, and we'll be able to put this out to everyone. And I really believe that that's what's going to help NeuroNet be a cornerstone here of, or at least one of the survivable companies that are providing compute in the industry.
Thanks, Don. Okay.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, we got Yubo.
Hey. I'm trying to see if I can share my screen. Let's see if this works.
Oh, don't try.
Okay, don't try it? Okay. Alright, I'll just put the Google Docs spreadsheet in here. and then you guys can just follow along.
Totally. And we'll also just post the slides right into the channel. That's one way to do it.
Yeah, I just did that. So today I'm presenting bitsec. It's an ecosystem for AI-powered code vulnerability detection. And yeah, feel free to message me on Discord or Twitter. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm John Yu. I'm the founder of this subnet in this project. And I've been a long time participant in crypto. It's actually 14 years now. And I've been programming since 5th grade, professionally programming since like 10th grade. So yeah, I've done a lot of different programming, a lot of different crypto type projects. If you've used any Cosmos NFT stuff, you've probably used some of my smart contracts. And
Like,
during that smart contract development, our team actually ran into a security vulnerability in one of the contracts, and it cost us $200,000, which is a like pretty crazy amount. So I checked like afterwards, and on like some random weekend I had nothing to do. So I used ChatGPT APIs, and I actually found that same vulnerability in the same code base. That was back in like two and a half years ago. And yeah, that basically like launched the journey of what ended up becoming bitsec. And we all know that like anyone that writes code, like code exploits, it costs a lot of money. In Web 2, it's hundreds of billions of dollars. In Web 3, it's billions of dollars. Like any mistake can end up costing you a lot. And it's not just in terms of money, it's also in terms of trust and adoption from new users. And we also see pickup from like Department of Defense, OpenAI, Anthropic, and a lot of academic institutions that have active funding and research for this specific area. And the current solution for these code exploits are, at least in Web3, is humans, like people coming through the code, and they're expensive, they take a lot of time, but also they just don't really work because week after week we see these like $100 million, like billion-dollar hacks that happen all the time. So my solution, after experiencing all these different frustrations, is bitsec, which offers on-demand machine-based security audits. So it turns the idea of human-based audit competitions like Code Arena, Sherlock, and it flips it more towards using compute provided by bittensor and other networks. And there's a more detailed view of all the different actions in the subnet. And just to simplify, like if you have questions, we can get back to this later, but just to simplify it, validators take code, clean code, and then they inject vulnerabilities into the code, and there's a data augmentation pipeline to create a challenge. And there's a simple image of a Solidity smart contract with a withdrawal. But the problem in this withdrawal is that it doesn't check if the user is creating this withdrawal message. So anyone can withdraw money from this smart contract. Like that's a poor design, but a good challenge for miners to find that vulnerability. And the data sources that these validators can pull from, so right now it's Solidity smart contracts, but it can really find vulnerabilities in a lot of different types of code bases, different languages, different vulnerability types like economic exploits and subnet incentive mechanisms, for instance. And it's more like a benchmarking evaluation problem than like a problem of like try it with Python, try it with Rust. So we try to add additional challenges with different types of data sets. So they could be open source data sets, AI generated, also adding the data pipeline to increase the variations, and real world code bases. So imagine like expanding it to Web 2, just like SQL injection or access control, right? There's like millions and millions of code bases that this could be used for. So the miner gets a challenge and they do something and then they respond. So they respond with a list of vulnerabilities. And what's in this vulnerability type? You have to specify the category, where the vulnerable code is in the lines of code, like a line of code range, description with what the impact of the exploit might be, and then a proof of concept showing that this is actually like a real vulnerability. So this is not just like pulled out of thin air. This is basically mimicking an entry in an audit report. So when a validator gets a bunch of miner responses, they can stitch those together to create an audit report. And the scoring mechanism is pretty straightforward. It's A, which is the known vulnerabilities, and B, which is the miner responses. And then you get this Jacquard score, intersection over union accuracy score. It could get a lot more complicated, like a penalty for false positives, different types of penalties or rewards for finding like critical or high vulnerabilities, for instance. And on slide 11, this is like miner rewards over time. So you can see the people who score pretty well, they end up staying close to the top. And these other ones, like sometimes they score well, sometimes they don't. So it seems like the miner performance is like relatively stable. And what's the point? Like, what can we do with all these different miner responses? So the idea here is to create a network, an interface to all of these really smart, specific miners. And two applications that come to mind is a GitHub codebase scanner, and then instead of like having someone sign up for like a monthly subscription, you can also just use it in-house. Like we'll just scan all the code bases out there and find bugs. If they have bug bounties, then just start collecting real revenue from them. And a few upcoming milestones. So benchmarks for vulnerabilities is kind of in a sad state right now. OpenAI gave out a grant to try to push this forward, but it's basically just like a static test. And any static test you can just overfit and then score really well, but not project out to unknown data sets. So there's, we'll probably test this out with the existing benchmark, but then ideally expand the benchmark to something more dynamic that will constantly be challenged. And then also participating in bug bounties and audit competitions. So this is where real revenue is coming in. So this goes back to the piece where a validator gets the code from bug bounties or audit competitions, sends it out to the miners as an organic request, and then pieces all the responses together back for a complete audit report. And this is coming really soon. I really want to get it done for today's presentation, but it's not quite ready yet. And then expanding to different types of code, different languages, vulnerability types. So it really would make sense, like this can be used for, I think, any type of vulnerability. Some vulnerability classes will perform much better for this type, and then some minor groups will perform better. So we might end up using something similar to Bitmine's camo approach to select miners based on context, and then also alpha token plans. I'll get that. I'll save that towards the end. And yeah, a misconception that a lot of people have is that it's just like, like me working on this on my own. Like, there have been a lot of people who have contributed during this journey. And I'll just name a few people, like Semi and Matan from the start. They help navigate the bittensor ecosystem, and the folks at Yuma, really sharp people with security and incentives. And yeah, just a lot of people have made amazing contributions to this project so far. And yeah, so I didn't want to show any zero-day exploits. So all of these are like older exploits, like 45 to 60-day exploits. So the code bases have drastically changed. Like, yeah, I'm on the subnet owner side. I'm on the builder side. I want to make it easier for builders to build fast and not worry about getting exploited. So yeah, this one was really surprising to me. So the case study with MyShell and Dippy Speech. So they're using PCA and MLP, which are differentiable transforms, which can be attacked by like optimizing completely, because based on the loss curve, like you can really get owned unless if you take these suggestions from the generated audit report, like adding noise, using multiple models, using ensemble scoring. So that was a really surprising finding. And all of these were found just, so they're old, right? Like 45, 60 days old. My subnet's only been out like 1 month. So all of this was generated from me as the miner, me as the validator, and then just like submitting the code in testnet. And yeah, compute subnets have a lot of problems with like gaming GPU benchmarks. I'm really interested to hear Zoro's Merkle tree approach. Like that sounds pretty cool to me. I need to like double check that. But yeah, like it's a big problem, and I think that there are solutions out there. Yeah, anyways, let's go to the next one. So this one was just like me running it on the code. So yeah, we run this like every time that we push to production. And sometimes we find like things that maybe we've considered before. A lot of times the exploits that we find, subnet owners already know about them, but they haven't figured out a good solution, or it's not prioritized based on other higher priorities. So in this example, there's a medium exploitation where you can just send like the entire dictionary of categories to inflate the score. So we found this one ourselves, and then that's why we created the Jacquard scoring, where it's more like an accuracy score. So you penalize over-reporting, for instance. And yeah, it doesn't just work for subnet code. Like we also found scanning the bittensor like pip supply chain attack. So just scanned it really quickly and found it in like 10 minutes. Like there's a post to some unknown link, and then it sends the private key away. And there's a full detail of how the hacker tried to cover their tracks too. So yeah, it's like pretty interesting that when you reframe the problem into like throw more bodies, like throw more specialized humans at the problem, versus now it's like throw more compute at the problem, throw better algorithms at the problem, then you can afford to scan all kinds of different code and find like crippling vulnerabilities before they happen. And yeah, the market is huge. It's like billions of dollars. And we aim to capture 25 million per year just through bug bounties. And when people see how effective we are in bug bounties, then we can start charging for other things like GitHub subscriptions and whatever. And so you made it to the end. So what's the alpha on our alpha token? So a few things that I personally think when it comes to evaluating alpha, you're investing in people. You're investing in the problem that they're trying to solve with the product that they create. And then at the very end, I think it's subnet price. And I think you have to ask yourself, like, does this plan make sense? Like, where's the execution risk? And at this current price, do I believe this person? Do I think that they're going to be able to make it? So with the alpha token, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like the problem is really expensive, and it's basically just like stitching all this stuff together to make a report, and then start collecting from bug bounties. And once that happens, then we can use some of that revenue to buy back the alpha token. And yeah, I think like good things can happen. And another alternative I haven't heard too many other people talk about, but I think it'd be interesting if you have a leaderboard of top holders, and then maybe top like 5 holders get free enterprise access, like the top 5 like alpha token holders. So for instance, like some VC, they have a portfolio of like hundreds of portfolio companies. Maybe they can like start buying my alpha token and then using this subnet as a way to secure like all their portfolio companies. Just a quick example. So the conclusions here, yeah, even before this call, like someone was saying this is subnet specific exploit finding. That's not true. It can find all exploits. Well, it has the potential to find all exploits in all code. Not quite there yet. That's like a work in progress. That's like the end goal. The key thing, I think, is instead of betting on one team with one approach, I think it's better to bet on the ecosystem. So aligning all the incentives of the validators, miners, researchers, subnet owner to create the best overall solution that can adapt to all the introductions of newest models, newest algorithms, and data together. And I think the real goal is to help teams that are building without slowing them down. And yeah, contact me on Discord or X. Any questions?
I can read them from the chat. If people have questions, they can put them in the chat. Let's go back to what I think was the most interesting slide. Just like performance over time, running the average reward by cold key over time. Like, what does this actually amount to? Like, if you could explain what this chart means. Like, you've been on mainnet for a fairly short period of time. How long have you been on mainnet, Ibo?
Since the end of January. So it's basically like a month and change.
And so this is performance on the core benchmark, which is really a proxy for whether or not the miners are capable of extracting the vulnerability that you're using, that you've injected through the synthetic pipeline. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And so let me get this straight. So you find a code base, potentially large code base, an entire GitHub, and you have a machine learning model. Is that correct? Is a whole GitHub?
So it's not a whole GitHub. In this case, it's like a blockchain smart contract code. So typically a Solidity smart contract, because of token limitations. And we strip out. Actually, it's kind of funny. There's a lot of noisy files in there that induce more hallucinations, or actually misses in like vulnerability detection. So if you have a test case for, let's say, like access control, and that test case is included in the context, then the models are hindered at finding access control vulnerabilities because of the presence of that test.
Interesting. The goal, though, is it will be a full GitHub that you can submit, not just a contract, correct?
Yes, correct.
And so you find a contract and you basically inject an exploit that you know beforehand. So you create the answer.
Yes.
And right now, the miners are performing better and better. Like the score here is showing 80. Does that mean that, or like it looks like 85? Does that mean 85% of the time the miners are now able to determine the exploit with proficiency, whereas before it was only 60% of the time? Is that what I'm looking at here?
Yeah, I think that interpretation is correct.
It would be useful if it could be looking at all of the EVM contracts on bittensor as well, just innately. What is the state of the art here? Like, we get to 90% on this benchmark and we're the best in the world?
So that's a really good question. So the last slide is on benchmarks. And because there's no really good benchmarks, it's hard to tell like which one is the best. Like, which one should we really be using? So is it audit reports? So then it's like man versus machine, or is it like machine versus machine, like using Slither or other stack analysis? Or is it just like straight performance on a leaderboard? So like audit competitions and bug bounties. If we start ranking like number 1, for instance, on all leaderboards, like found bugs, then arguably that's probably the best metric and evaluation.
Where is that leaderboard of found bugs?
So we use I mean, there's different bug bounty programs in different audit competitions, and each of them has leaderboards on who's earned the most or who's found the most bugs. So it's really just like ranking well on these organic requests on like real vulnerabilities.
You could even use that as part of your validation system if you had the miners submit solutions to bug bounties and then they genuinely found solutions that were verified by others.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's like definitely where we want to go. You're like reading my mind.
Do you see this network as this 24/7 giga machine that is just out there on the internet full time, where you're feeding it every single line of code, every single bug bounty, and it's just constantly, it's not writing PRs, it's actually just finding every exploit in the world?
That's one approach, but I think there might be another approach that's more suitable towards enterprise use cases. So, for instance, let's just give some random example like optimism, right? Like they're a $1 billion chain, and they're running like hundreds of millions of dollars through a bridge smart contract. So they can afford $1 million of compute, for instance, to just run everything, point it towards their thing for like a couple weeks and see if they find anything, right? So I think it's like you could do it like the first way too, but I think eventually it'll be more like geared towards what's the best economic use of this this compute. And for a hackathon project, maybe it's like $100 of compute. For like that bridge contract example, maybe it's like, I don't know, $10 million. Or in Bybit's case, like $1 billion.
The scope of problems that you're sending to the network are contracts, but the scope of vulnerabilities could include the fact that you can SSH into this machine, plus there's a code vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. What's your plan for expanding that scope slowly over time in the incentive design so that eventually the network is capable of finding the full class of exploitation?
Yeah, that is extremely challenging. And it's something that I'm not sure how to address right now, but it's something that I definitely want to collaborate with academic researchers who are also interested in like, how do you make this into a compute bound problem? How do you like add new domains into this vulnerability detection?
Is it a compute problem? Because the sophistication of the top miners on your subnet is not just the ability to run machine learning models quickly, it's also prompting of those machine learning models. Like, what are you actually suspecting that the miners that are succeeding on your network are doing?
I'm guessing they're using, well, the first thing is using like I built my own AI audit tools, and the first pass is really using better models, and then enhancing them with better prompts, and then using AI agents to do like multiple searches on different classes of vulnerabilities, and then piecing together the results. So I'm guessing the miners are using a similar approach to like what I did.
right? Which is piecing together models, running through the source code. When it comes to larger problems, like here's a code base, what do you suspect that these agents will be doing, these miners are doing?
That's going to be super interesting. I think basically they'll need to synthesize the code bases into a workable context within smaller models. And then looking through likely sectors of the code in combinations of different code bases and libraries to see where the exploits could be.
It's sort of like the inverse challenge to Gen 42, subnet Gen 42, SWE Rizzo, I believe now,
Yes.
where the job is to write a full code base. In your design, it's the inverse. You're given a full code base and you have to unpack it and find all of the problems therein. I think that coming up with expansive and really like a covering set of all of the types of vulnerabilities is very hard from the synthetic perspective. Like, how do you generate all of those vulnerabilities? And like, can you speak to how you're doing that right now? Like, how do you solve the synthetic pipeline problem here?
Yeah, so it is a work in progress, but I've seen, even like mentioned before, with including test cases throwing off models. So even renaming the functions into, say, like withdraw and deposit into 1 or 2, it loses a lot of context in the model for evaluation. And then if people do like static analysis, then it's a different approach. So I think the data augmentation pipeline, that's what you're asking about. So what I'm doing is introducing different types of noise, like comment pollution, function pollution, and making it a little bit more challenging for the current models to zone in on a specific thing. But it could get a lot more sophisticated. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement there.
Sorry, I was muted there, Yubo. I think this is super exciting. One last question for me would be, what exploits and vulnerabilities have you seen on the subnet, like so far? Like a month or so in, very difficult to really cover all of the incentive issues that you're seeing, like you will see in every subnet on bittensor. Like, have you made something foolproof at this point? Are you happy with the outputs that you're getting from the network?
I am not happy, but I am also a perfectionist. Because, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure you know, like running a startup, there's levels of brokenness everywhere, and you're just trying to make everything a little bit less broken over time. Or at least that's my experience.
Yes.
And I think the most broken thing right now is just like there's something really close to generating revenue, but it's not like quite there yet. So I think like that's what I need to focus on. And the miners and validators, like, yeah, they've been surprisingly helpful. And that's something that you harped on, and I'm realizing 100% that's true.
What specifically?
Oh, recruiting validators and miners as a part of the ecosystem, like asking them to do stuff. And,
Totally.
And like, yeah.
And the squashing of bugs and exploits is like a full-time job for a subnet owner. And if you have a intelligent miner base, one of the things that happens is that one of the miners will find an exploit, and they'll start applying that exploit. And if you have more than one miner, the other miners will start telling you that there's an exploit on the subnet because they're unhappy about the fact that their competitor is beating them. You see this all the time. And so you have just pen testers red teaming your system at all times. So solving the most difficult problem of the subnet is in effect being done full time by your mining community. And if you have those channels open, those problems can be solved quickly.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience so far. It's like PvP with the miners.
Very PvP. The unknown miners. Yuba, let's end it here. So we began the call with me talking about the updates coming next week. A really large one with Burn UID, some changes with the staking operation fees. If people want to jump on stage and talk about that, or have questions about that one, they can ask them in the channel, and we can go through. I think it's quite an interesting conversation for people, or we can end it here. Does anybody want to come up stage? Sammy, Caro? No, I think that's it. All right, guys. Thanks, Yuba. This was fantastic. I appreciate your time, and good luck. See you next week, everyone. We'll be speaking with Namare, with Gradient, Shoots, and 19 next week, so very exciting. Ciao, everyone. Bye.
See you guys.